Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing another romance recommendations video. And you know, it's been a while since the last romance recommendations video that I posted. It's been 9 months. I just checked. I was like, what the heck? When I first started my YouTube channel, I used to be quite the avid romance reader. Like, romance was my primary genre of choice. But honestly, since I've been reading a lot more, you know, thriller and horror is usually the genres that I gravitate towards most these days. But within this last year, I feel like I have actually read a decent amount of romance, and there are so many romance books that I'm excited to recommend to you. But before we do jump into the video, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to a new sponsor on this channel, which is Books AI, because if you're an author, listen up, because this is amazing. Because if you're an author looking for a publishing partner to prepare, distribute, and market your book worldwide, I highly recommend checking out Books AI. Books AI is a veteran publishing house powered by a dedicated production team and cutting-edge AI technology. They guarantee the widespread distribution of your work while making the journey stress-free, convenient, and cost-effective. All that you have to do is provide them with your manuscript and set your preferences, and then a production manager will walk you through the process. It's nice for you as an author, you know, because you can spend more time writing instead of dealing with like the stressful situation of dealing with publishing. And unlike other publishers where you might have to wait months, their processing time is only 8 to 12 days. So here's an example of how you would get started. First, you'll choose your bundle. They have a basic, standard, and a premium plan that all offers different things. After choosing a plan, you'll be directed to a form where you can customize your book, including appearances like formatting, layout, and front and back cover designs. Their team will then review your manuscript and send it back to you for approval. They'll also offer suggestions for the cover design, and the manager will accommodate any special requests. And then they will distribute your book across 100+ channels, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and several others. Books AI adds value at every stage of the publishing process because they have unbeatable publishing times, they have AI support, they have veteran product managers, and dedicated customer support. And it's nice because their plans offer every possible publication-related service that you might need, such as proofreading, cover design, printing, distribution, and many more. It's the simplest and most affordable way to get your book published. And if you'd like to learn more about Books AI, you can check out the link in my description. And thank you so much once again to Books AI for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get into the romance recs, shall we? So the first book that I wanted to recommend to you is probably my favorite romance that I've read so far this year, and it's probably one you've been hearing non-stop about from other creators, so I'll just get this one out of the way first thing because it's Book Lovers by Emily Henry. And yes, if you've been hearing about this book non-stop, it's because it's worth the freaking hype. Oh my goodness. And in this book, we're following this woman named Nora, who is a literary agent, and it's this romance between her and this guy named Charlie, who is a book editor. So they kind of both work in the bookish world, and they kind of work on the same projects together. Sometimes they both work for the same company. And in this story, it's about how Nora's going to be taking this trip from New York to this very small town with her very pregnant sister. And while they're going to be in this small town together, you know, Nora's sister writes this list of all of the things that she wants to do together this summer. And this story is one that I love for so many reasons. I mean, you all know that I love a good sister, you know, relationship in books, and this sister relationship was freaking precious. I also just love the way that Emily Henry writes banter between her characters. Like, it literally makes me laugh out loud. It makes me giddy. Like, I just have a smile on my face the entire time I'm reading her characters and their banter. And this book was just precious, you know? Like, I absolutely adored Charlie. I adored this romance that was happening in this book so freaking hard, but I also just really loved Nora as a protagonist. I found her to be super relatable. I also love the fact that she loves New York City so freaking much, like freaking yes queen, relatable. There's just so many things that I absolutely adore about this book. Like, it's genuinely so freaking cute. Another book that I wanted to recommend right away is this book called Lease on Love. I do have a copy of this book, but I'm currently lending it to my mom to read because that's how much I freaking loved it. But yeah, this was another complete shock of a book. Like, I did not think that I was gonna love this one as much as I did, because this book, we're following this woman named Sadie who, you know, she's also living in New York. You'll see a trend here. I tend to love romances that take place in New York. Yeah, Sadie is, you know, doing her thing. She's at her job, and then she gets fired from her job because she kind of like makes a scene after she doesn't get this promotion that she very much deserved. And so she goes out with her friends and she's having a rough night, and she makes this plan to go on this blind date with this guy on this app that she thinks is a dating app, but it's actually an app for roommates. And there's like this whole miscommunication flirtation thing because she thinks she's going on a blind date with this guy Jack, but it's actually like, you know, just to get to know each other to see if they're gonna be compatible roommates. And so then we have one of my favorite tropes of like, you know, they're roommates and they're starting to catch feelings for each other, and this book is just so cute. I know a lot of people, their complaints about this book is that Sadie is really annoying, but I personally thought Sadie was really relatable, so like I don't know what that says about me, but like I really freaking loved Sadie in this book so much. I also think Jack is one of like the most precious love interests that I've ever read in a book. You know, he's dealing with a lot of grief in this book. It kind of tells you in the premise, so it's not a spoiler, but Jack's parents had recently passed away, and so he's kind of dealing with, you know, trying to open himself up to people again, and he's really closed off and he's really hurt by things that have happened in his life recently. And this book was just everything. Oh my god, like these two are so freaking cute. It's such a slow burn. It's like that roommates to lovers trope, and I just ate that shit up. Like I loved it so much. I love that it takes place in New York. Like there's just so much that I love about this. Another one of my recent favorite books is The Romantic Agenda, because this is a romance book that involves an asexual main character. And if you didn't know, I actually do identify as asexual, so this, you know, reading this romance just meant absolutely everything to me. I think it's so important too to see asexual representation in romance books specifically, because there are so many asexual people who still have romantic feelings, and so I think that's a really, you know, interesting thing to discuss and to learn more about in books like this. And in this book, we're following our main character is named Joy, and she's in love with her best friend Malcolm, and Joy is asexual. And this book is like one of those situations where it's like almost like a love triangle or like love hexagon square situation, because it's like Joy is in love with Malcolm, and then Malcolm wants to date this girl Summer, and then Summer has this ex-boyfriend named Fox, and they all decide to go on this trip together, and then there's all these feelings getting caught between this group. And this book is fun because it's very, you know, like vacation vibes. Like I love the friendship group in this. But also, like, the main reason why I love this book as much as I did is because of the asexual representation in this book. And there were some conversations in this book between Joy and her best friend Malcolm, like, especially towards the end, that just hit me so freaking hard. It was beautiful, it was stunning, and it's one of my favorite romance books that I've read this year. Like, I just loved it so freaking much. Another one of my favorites that I just read this year is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. And I believe this is the 4th book that I've read from this author, and this is by far my favorite book that I've read from this author. I think if you're going to read one book by this author, let it be this one. Like, oh my gosh, this one's so freaking good. And in this one, we're following this woman named Alexis who works in the city as an ER doctor, and then it's kind of her romance with this country boy named Daniel. And Daniel also happens to be 10 years younger than her. And this book is great for so many reasons, you know. I feel like the biggest thing that I love about this book is the forbidden kind of nature of their relationship. You know, I'm a huge fan of forbidden romances. Like, the more forbidden, the better. This felt really forbidden in some ways, you know, because their lives are just so different and they feel like they don't really fit into each other's world, because, you know, he's very young, you know, he's from a small town, and she's, you know, a very busy person. She's a doctor. Her family has all these like high expectations of her, and the fact that she's 10 years older than him just kind of adds to the forbidden nature of this. And I will warn you that this book does kind of start a little bit like not insta love, but like insta lust, because they almost get together like right away, and as soon as they see each other, they're like, I need you. But shortly after that, you know, the story definitely picks up, and it's such a beautiful ass story. Like, it got so much more emotional than I was anticipating. And I will warn you as well that there are some trigger warnings for some pretty dark things in this book, like physical and emotional abuse and things like that, so I will just warn you straight up. God, this book is amazing. It's so good. The ending had me crying. I just shipped these two so hard. Like, it was so beautiful. Another romance that's probably super hyped that you probably know about is The Love Hypothesis, but I had to mention this one because in my last romance recommendations video, I was talking about how this one was still on my TBR, so I can confidently recommend this one now. This one's really great, you know, because it involves fake dating, which is, you know, another one of my favorite romance tropes, and it's a fake dating scenario between two scientists. I won't spend too much time on this book because this book is so insanely popular right now, and so you've probably heard about it if you're at all interested in reading romances, but there's so much that I loved about this book, you know. Like, as I said, I love the fake dating trope. I loved the chemistry that these characters had, and I love romances that take place in a more like academic setting like this. I feel like I need more romances like this in my life, and it was just genuinely so cute and so worth all of the hype this book is getting. Another romance that I just read earlier this year is Count Your Lucky Stars by Alexandria Bellafleur, and yes, this is technically the 3rd book in the Written in the Stars series. We have book 1, book 2, and book 3, and I do think they are all fantastic, and I highly recommend all 3 of them. And I love that all 3 of these books, you know, it's all following the same friendship group, you know, like we're all following the same set of friends, which I freaking love. They all take place place in Seattle, which I also love, and they all kind of have to do with like astrology and like astronomy and like the stars. I mean, all of these titles have like, you know, astronomy kind of related titles, and they also all involve queer characters, which I think is really awesome. But yeah, Count Your Lucky Stars is amazing because we're following this woman named Margot. Back in the day, like 11 years ago when she was in high school, she was with this girl Olivia for like a short period of time. Like Margot and Olivia, they had this connection, they had this thing, and then something happened and it didn't end up working out. And so now this is about how they're seeing each other again for the first time in like 11 years. And even though, you know, the second chance romance trope isn't my favorite, I really enjoyed this one. Like, I don't know, I thought they were so freaking cute. I love the chemistry in this, and I feel like part of the reason why this book worked for me so well is because it also has one of my other favorite tropes, which is like roommates to lovers. I freaking love the roommates to lovers trope so much, and so this had that going for it, which I think contributed to why I enjoyed it so much. I also just genuinely adored both of these female characters so much. Like, I just thought they were both so cute. I also love to recommend Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This is the same author as The X-Talk, which is a romance that I read last year that I really freaking loved. And this one, while I didn't love it quite as much as The X-Talk, I still think that this was a really fantastic romance that I highly recommend checking out. This one is really fun, you know, because we're following these two people who work in TV news, which is also one of my favorite things to read. Like, I just love reading about like the working behind the scenes in TV news. And the female protagonist in this, she's a TV meteorologist and then he's a sports reporter. But it's kind of cute because it's kind of like the Netflix movie Set It Up, where they're trying to scheme to set up their bosses to make their lives easier, and then they just start falling for each other in the process. So yeah, very Set It Up vibes in this one, but there's just so much that I loved about this book, you know, because as I said, I love that they work in TV news, I love that this takes place in Seattle, and you know, I love the diversity in this cast because all of these characters are Jewish, and the male love interest in this book is a fat single dad. So like, there's just so much different representation in this book that I really appreciate. And yeah, this is just one of those romances that just makes you feel all like warm and cozy inside and just leaves you with good feelings, you know? Another romance that I very recently just read that I would love to recommend is The Roughest Draft. This one is kind of, I don't know, this one is everything that I was hoping for Beach Read by Emily Henry. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of Beach Read, but this was everything that I wanted Beach Read to be, because, you know, in this story we're following two writers, which, you know, we've established I love romances that involve writers. In this one, it's really interesting because these two, they were never like together in the past. They always just had this kind of like unspoken thing between them. Like, they always just had a lot of chemistry that never really went anywhere, but they wrote these books together back in the day, and the books were really successful. They became really famous because of them, but then they stopped writing books together, and now he's published his own book, but it's like not very successful, and she's kind of doing her own thing, and their agents are conspiring, and they're like, we need to get them back together to write another book because their careers kind of depend on this, you know? And so this book is about how their agents get them back together and get them to go to the same place where they used to write their books together and kind of force them to write another book together. And so it's kind of amazing because I love when you follow writers in a romance in this way. It's just so romantic because I love the way that they kind of like write the scenes with like unspoken things that they want to say to each other but they can't, and it's just, I don't know, like there's just something about this book. I loved it so much. I thought it was so cute and so romantic, and their chemistry was so good. I also wanted to recommend The Royals Next Door by Karina Hall. I also feel like this one is perfect to read during the summer because this book takes place during the summer. We're following this girl named Piper who's an elementary school teacher by day, and then she has this romance podcast that she does at nighttime, which I just think is so freaking cool, and I love whenever a book can like include a podcast like that. But her whole summer is turned upside down when a prince and a princess move in next door to her, and she's like, what the heck? And then it's kind of a romance between her and the bodyguard of the prince and the princess that live next door, which I think is such a cute take on like the royal thing, you know, because sometimes in romance when there's like royal people involved, I never know if it's going to be a hit for me because sometimes like the royal thing can get annoying for me. But I do love the idea of her falling for their bodyguard, you know, I'm like, that's cute. And this one was just adorable, you know, like it's not one of my like top tier, god tier favorite romances ever, but it was like a good time, you know, and I think it's a good one to read in the summer. Another book that I found very enjoyable is The Wedding Ringer, and this one is another like cute, soft romance and involves a wedding. You know, I do love romances that involve weddings, and this one's really cute, you know, because we're following this woman named Willa, and she's sitting in a coffee shop when she gets approached by this woman, and she's saying like, hey, I don't really have any friends, would you mind being like my fake friend so that I can have you as a bridesmaid in my wedding. It's very like I love you man vibes, you know, but like with girls. And I just thought this one was so cute because then this ends up being a romance between this girl Willa and then one of the other groomsmen. But honestly, like I would recommend this book for the friendship, you know, between Willa and this girl, like the bride in this. Like I just think their friendship is so freaking cute. And honestly, I do feel like this romance would have been better if it was a romance between the two women. Like how cute would that have been? Oh my god, god tier. But I still think that this was a very cute, very enjoyable romance, and so I do recommend it. I think this one would also be perfect for the summer because of the wedding vibes. The next one I wanted to recommend is actually Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, and this is a book that I have such mixed feelings about because this book just hit me emotionally, but I do still think it's a really great romance that's worth recommending. Following this woman named Kenna, and she's just getting out of prison. Like she's been in prison for the last 5 years, and then this is a story about how she's doing everything within her power to reunite with her 4-year-old daughter. And this book was just really tough to read, you know. It ends up being this romance between her and this local guy named Ledger. It's one of those stories where like it is very romance heavy, but at the same time it's also like this beautiful like mother-daughter story about struggle and, you know, making mistakes. And it's just a really tough read, you know, like there's nothing easy about this book. But also like this book made me like gross sob at the end of it, so I feel like it's one that I have to recommend even though I do have such mixed feelings about it. Like even to this day, I still don't know how I feel about this main character. Like there are just some things and choices that she made that just don't sit right with me, but at the same time, people deserve love, you know, even if they make mistakes, and it's just really tough. It's really tough, but it's really beautiful and just really moved me a lot. And then one book I wanted to recommend is the only young adult one that I have on this list because I don't usually love young adult romances. Like they're usually like not my fave, but I had to recommend XOXO because this is probably one of my personal favorite young adult romances that I've read recently. And this one is just so freaking cute, you know, because we're following this young girl who's living in LA and she meets this guy in like a karaoke bar in her uncle's bar, and it's so cute because they have this like really cute first exchange when they meet, and at the time she doesn't know that he's like a huge K-pop star in Korea. And so then it's about how she's going to be going to Korea to like spend time with either like her grandparents or something like that. Like she has grandparents that she's never met, so she's going to spend the summer back in South Korea. And then when she lands in South Korea, she realizes that this guy that she had met in Los Angeles is like the biggest K-pop star in South Korea. And then it's about how she's able to like meet him again, and they're able to like, you know, have cute exchanges and like start to catch feelings for each other. And I don't know, I just adored this book. I just loved it so much. I feel like it's like the perfect summer young adult romance, and it's genuinely one of the only young adult romances that made my heart just like so happy. Another romance that I would recommend to you only if you're looking for like a fun and ridiculous time that's like not very serious, that has like nothing serious at all happening, I would recommend Ice Planet Barbarians. And I know like you're probably thinking, oh my god, Gabby, you're absolute trash for recommending this book, but honestly, like if you're looking for some fun, entertainment, escapism, like just get lost in some ridiculous world, I would recommend Ice Planet Barbarians. Like it's literally not that bad. It's a fun time, okay? So if you're side-eyeing me right now and you're like, what the heck is that? Like what even is that about? This is a story about how this woman named Georgie gets abducted by aliens, and then she gets taken to this world, and while she's there she meets this giant blue alien man named Vectel, and it's about their romance. Like it's very erotic, you know, they pretty much get to it right away, if you know what I'm saying, and they don't really speak the same language, so it's just a lot of sex scenes for the most part. And it's definitely not for everyone, you know, and the writing is not anything special or very good, but I do think that if you're looking for something that's just kind of fun, you know, different, a little strange, if you're looking for something that's just very entertaining and will hold your attention and is also kind of a fun, you know, forbidden romance, then I don't know, I would recommend Ice Planet Barbarians. I know that this is like a 17 book series or something crazy like that. Like there's so many books. I've only read the first one, and this was like a 3-star romance for me, you know, it wasn't anything like god tier amazing, but I do think it's a fun time, you know, if you're looking to take your mind off of things, this will definitely take your mind off of things. So yeah, anyways, if you're still with me after that one, the last 2 books that I wanted to mention are both books that I personally gave 3 out of 5 stars. Like they weren't all-time favorites for me, but I do think that these books have an audience even though they necessarily weren't for me, so I still thought I would recommend them, because the first one is going to be The Sweetest Remedy, and then I also have Love and Other Disasters. And in The Sweetest Remedy, we're following this woman who who has to go back to Nigeria for her father's funeral. And this is for a father that she's never met, like never really had a relationship with, but she hears that he died, and so she decides to go and like pay her respects and learn more about her family that she never knew about over there. And then while that's happening, there's also a romance happening between her and this guy. And that's the thing with this book that I feel like it was kind of mismarketed, you know, because this book, while it does say that it's a romance on Goodreads, I would say more that this is like a contemporary coming of age story for this woman, and then there's also some romantic elements happening in this book. But I feel like if you know that going into this book, that the romance isn't as heavy as you might expect, then you would probably enjoy this one a little bit more than I did. I think I just went into this one expecting, you know, like a romance story to be at the forefront of the story, but it's really not. It's more of like a family contemporary story, but it also does have a really beautiful romance happening at the same time. You also do get the point of view of, you know, some of her siblings in this book, and so there are points of views from like other people outside of just the romance, which is why it doesn't feel like the typical romance to me. But I do think this book has an audience, you know. I do think it was a really well written book, and I do think there will be people who will really enjoy this. It was just okay for me, but I thought I would still recommend it. And then same goes for Love and Other Disasters. This one is fun because it involves like a cooking show, and these two meet on a cooking show, and the love interest is non-binary in this book, which I'm pretty sure this was my first time ever reading a non-binary love interest in a book, which is why it was such a special experience for me to read this book in the first place. The reason why it didn't end up working for me as much is because I found a lot of the, you know, middle parts of the book to be a lot slower than I was wanting. And even though it was about a cooking show, it just wasn't as entertaining as I was hoping it would be. But I still think that this is one worth recommending, especially if you're looking for representation of a non-binary character in a romance, just because it's not as common as I would like for it to be. I do feel like it's getting more common though, so hopefully we will have more books that we can recommend in the future that have non-binary main characters in them. But this was still a cute time, you know, like I loved the atmosphere of the cooking TV show. I loved the chemistry that these characters had, so I do still think it's worth reading. It's just not one of my favorite romances ever. Alright, well those are all of the different romance recommendations that I have for you today. I'm so excited that I finally got the chance to do another romance recommendations video, you know, because as I said, it's been a while. I feel like I've gotten more back into the swing of reading a lot more romances than I have in like these last 2 years, and that makes my heart happy because I love reading good romance. You'll have to let me know if you've read any of these books and what you think of them, or if you have any romance books that you would like to recommend to me. I'm always looking for more romance recommendations, so don't be afraid to drop them in the comments down below. And thank you so much once again to Books AI for sponsoring today's video, and definitely if you are an author, definitely go and check them out because I think that's a really amazing, efficient way to get your book published. Yeah, that is all. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!